Cattle Decapitation. Their new album is called Terrasite. This one has been out for about a week or so. I think pretty much everyone knows Cattle Decapitation by now if you've been into heavy music for like more than a couple of years. Like, there was that sort of stage of their career of like Monolith of Inhumanity and the Anthropocene extinction about 10 years ago, where they were this super dedicated extreme band, started doing something that got them on a lot more radars and became a band that a lot more people outside of the world of death metal and grindcore began to be turned on to. I mean, like, Sam, you're giggling, like, you can attest to the fact that to someone just into their kind of modern metal, Cattle Decapitation really leveling up last decade was one of those things that, like, you couldn't really look away from. No,
you had to, like, if you were interested in, like, cool stuff going on in metal, as long as you had a palette to get to in something slight, like, as long as you could handle something a little bit extreme, you kind of had to take notice of Cattle Decapitation for what they were doing, and it, like I said, it caught my ears, and like I've been in on them ever since.
Yeah, theirs is a trajectory that has turned them into one of the most unique death metal bands of all time. Like, they have made like some of my favourite records ever. We find themselves at a kind of an intriguing point for them though, because I personally feel like their records from the 2010s form an incredible kind of arc that I got to experience firsthand, where we had this like rapid evolution, record upon record, like Monolith through to Death Atlas. Each record like introduces some really new ideas and like then double down on them and creates this kind of sensation of this like extreme metal entity, just like absolutely gobbling up all of these different sounds and ideas and like repurposing it for its own ends. And then Death Atlas almost felt like a full stop on the whole thing. It's like the end game of the 2010s Cattle Decapitation sound. Like, it had been taken from this just one of the most like bug nuts intense things anyone recorded in Monolith of Inhumanity, through to this point of like extreme despair and like mournfulness at the end of that record, where it literally just ends with like the extinction of humanity. And then Cattle Decapitation have to pick up from that, both thematically and sonically. And not only that, you may remember the last album had a song on it called Bring Back the Plague, which has since proven to be one of the most popular songs ever. But they released that at the end of 2019. I think this record, Terrasite, is always going to be marked with the kind of perverse irony of, well, the plague just happened. Where the fuck do we take this now?
Yeah, I mean, for me, this feels like a bit of a, I don't know if you say rebirth of the band, because it's the same sound that they've been dealing with. There's been the changes along the way, but it's definitely a latter era Cattle Decapitation record. There's nothing really on here that makes me feel like it's the Brave New World for them all over again. But there is a thing about Death Atlas where it's like, this is the end.
Yeah.
And now it's like, what's the kind of connection to what comes after that?
Yeah, I mean, they've very consciously done that with this record, because, I mean, again, if you are new to Cattle Decapitation, they make these records that act as like these gargantuan kind of apocalyptic statements about, like, the kind of environmental crisis, about humanity's role in the devastation of the planet, and it comes from a really horrible misanthropic standpoint of, we've made our shitty bed and now we lie in it. But it is capable, like I said, of these moments where that kind of fuck you bravado slips a little bit, and they let the sorrow flow out of it, which brings you to songs like the closing title track of Death Atlas, which, for people who aren't actually like familiar with Cattle Decapitation and just view them as the silly monster man on the cover of this album, like, it sounds weird, but that song genuinely is like difficult to listen to at certain moments for how like genuinely moving it is in its kind of like epitaph for the human race and the incoming end. But Terrasite, like I said, it has to deal with the kind of musical and thematic arc of Cattle Decap kind of coming to a natural conclusion, and then they experience something like the pandemic along the way, and the answer they've come up with is, well, I guess humanity evolved into something even uglier and we just keep on doing what we do, which is what that thing on the cover is. Musically, I think that kind of matches that ethos as well. I mean, we've got some more, horror where that came from.
Yeah, it's a weird record, this, because for me, it's almost like the way that Sunbather is a sun-kissed black metal record. This is a kind of sun-kissed death metal record, because it has this new dawn quality to it that is both inviting and horrifying in equal measure, and
like
it's really hard to explain.
Scorched.
Yeah, maybe sun scorched is that, where it's like the sun's come up, we've made it, but something is very, very wrong. Like this, and it has all the same disdain and bile that the last records had, but there is this sense of something else this time around, which I think makes this, to spoil it slightly, a super special record.
Interesting. I think it's a really brutal, effective dose of Cattle Decapitation. I think the intro sounds super fucking cool. Like, it's a Terrasite adaptation. They really get that mind's eye imagery of what you're saying about that kind of dawn, where the music there sounds like this, this race of things on the cover kind of emerging out of their cocoons, like all of those spindly limbs. It does feel like there's a kind of twisted dawn there where there's some, epoch is starting, and it might not be a positive one.
Yeah, so like, for me, that reminds me of the bit in, is it 2001? When all the chimps are touching at the monolith. And I know they've referenced 2001 before.
Yeah.
But that same sense of, it's something new and that's exciting, but also kind of menacing.
The start of this record just feels really imposing, like something bad is rising up. And like I say, is it these insectoid human beings that are going to, spread across the earth and spread a new kind of misery that humanity seems incapable of not doing? But it does, like, set the tone of the record. I just think, like, no bands do apocalyptic quite like Cattle Decapitation at this point. They are just a band who, the moment you hit play on a record, you just know that there is this impending sense of everything is going to end horribly.
I mean, when that song boots off with the blast, like, nothing equals the level of force at full blasting power that Cattle Decap get. Like, it's an actual feat how casually they've been able to make themselves sound like this absolute world-ending behemoth. Like, how do other bands not sound like this yet? Like, how has no one nicked their fucking sound? Like, it is cartoonishly heavy, while being at, like, maximum sort of, pristineness that they've developed in the last 10 years. And, like, it's still a kind of, it's a supercharged, overpowered sound, where you can actually still hear everything. Like, you can hear the bass thundering away. We Are Young is an absolute ball breaker of a tune. Like, those songs that are going to go in the live set list, like Bring Back the Plague did. Good God, just like the vomiting up of that riff at the start, and then all of the tempo shifts in it are absolutely brilliant.
The stomp in the middle is just...
It's that little riff that plays right at the beginning of it before that song blasts off, and I was like, oh yeah, that's what I want. And then you get that breakdown, like, Travis locking in his vocals with the kind of, like, breakdowny bit in the middle.
Is that the straight into the dirt, like, hard as fuck?
That bit, like, so good. And, like, the hatred for humanity that pours out of that track. Like, you believe that this is one of the most nihilistic men ever when you hear him.
I mean, like, there's like the evil riffs in that song when it shifts into that kind of black metal register, when Travis is doing, like, the shriller rasp, and then you get to that tempo drop and you get the gang chant of the We Are Young. It's apocalyptic, but it's also just fucking cool as well, and it feels awesome to shout along to, which again is what some of their kind of their more like live staple type songs really manage to do.
Yeah, and just like you say, the cool factor is something that I think is kind of underrated in Cattle Decapitation. Like, the one that stands out for me is that bit in, I think it's Not Suitable for Life,
right?
Where it's like, God damn, you're a legends.
Yeah,
and it's so, like, spiky and spiteful and kind of fun on that level. And there's loads of that on this record. Like, we talked about the stomp on We Are Young, but then, like, when it goes into sort of the Floydian space rock break on The Insignificance, and it's like, it's just in between these two sections that feel like you're in a riptide of sewage. And then you get lifted out for this almost pretty bit, and then it goes straight back to crushing you. No mercy.
Like, The Insignificance to me, like, that is, like, an actual banger in a way, and that it's got so many just, like, actual, like, head banging, fist pumping riffs, and, like, but then you get that, like, droning clean vocal at the end, which is just like, oh yeah, no, this is still, misery, and we have always been the virus. And as they build up on that, like, they know how to be, like, exciting and fun, but also kind of, like, put you in a place of, like, oh, this is horrible music for fucked up people.
Yeah, like that grim but fun too sensibility. Like, the hook that comes in Terrasite Adaptation, where it's like you're, like, bouncing around like elbows out as this new race of monsters is born, and you have the gang vocals of the Parasite. Like, it sounds great. And in terms of, like, those chorus moments, which are, again, so, if you've never heard Cattle Decapitation before, like, it's the thing that you'll go, what the fuck is that? Like, still, over 10 years after they started doing those things. And The World Will Go On Without You is a brilliant one, where I think there you can feel how much kind of twisted pleasure they're getting out of it, because you can almost, like, feel his tongue, like, swirling around in his mouth to get those voices. It's creativity and just kind of, like, pushing the inhuman, I guess. And I think that has always made them fall into this kind of, some extreme metal bands, they fall into this kind of trap of just being kind of characterless, right? And extreme, like, it's not always known for its charisma, but this band have always had that kind of, that star power and that perversity to them. There's some, like, really horrid, like, old Morbid Angel-y riffs in that song as well. And there is that side of them, but also particularly it's amped up on the last couple of records. There's that sense of the mournful when the kind of drama comes out of those things, which again, so many bands will never ever think to do in this kind of lane. Scourge of the Offspring really early on, which again, like that riff that starts like just kicks you in the gut, like it's so heavy, but melodically I think that's the real kind of wow moment of like, it's capable of some like genuine pathos as well, because it's like as tormented and disgusting as the rest of it, but how that melody is used in that song is heartbreaking. That like
Clean section where like it gets genuinely kind of epic, but in you're right, a really like upsetting way. Like it's really cool, and that comes out the first part of that song, which is like mental kind of polyrhythm, like what so many like tech metal bands wish they could sound like. This is actually fucking
catchy as well. Like
that's what I mean. Like that's when I say it's what those bands wish they could come out with, and all of these things. You're right. It just gives them so much character. Like I could like put a Cattle Decapitation, and I could do like that's Cattle Decapitation, which I couldn't do with quite a lot of death metal bands sometimes, because they not faceless, but they don't have the immediately distinctive personality and character that Cattle Decapitation have in every aspect, not just Travis as a vocalist, but the playing and all that. It just feels like them and no one else.
Well, the cleanliness of this record is one of the things I think makes Cattle stand out, because I can't really think of many death metal bands where I'm happy to hear them with almost no dirt under the fingernails. In a sense, like you can hear every single thing, and it's because they're great performers. Like they'd have to fake it to have a muddy sounding record, and the clean production on this record, it makes the sort of frantic, gross parts more disorienting and upsetting. But I guess like 2001, that film looks amazing, nearly 60 years later, and it's because it was the height of technology at the time. And similarly, the horror of what they're getting across, for me, it's so much more vivid when it's in that sort of totally callous, clean, high-intensity light, sort of shining in your face. And again, I don't think this is like the largest artistic jump for Cattle Decapitation by any means, but I think it's the best they've delivered that thing.
Well, I think, it's a comparison point, because again, Death Atlas is quite mired in sort of, it's a clean record, but it's almost like a nighttime record in that regard, because it is, it's the dusk kind of falling upon us, and I guess it manages to get you to those moments, like again that chorus in Scourge of the Offspring, which is the catchiest thing on the record by far. Like again, I've been fucking singing it, but like it's so despairing, that kind of what a wondrous life, that whole thing. And it sounds like, again, with the way Travis delivers it, this kind of image of all that, these kind of myriad voices all kind of locked in together in this kind of like doomed death rasp, where like he uses the word swarm in it, and it sounds like a swarm of people essentially, like all like kind of trying to reach out, and it sonically is an unbelievable thing to achieve in terms of using the ugliness of all of the tools of extreme metal and extreme metal vocals particularly, and being able to create some kind of genuinely impactful, like heart-tugging imagery out of it. I do think the lyrics have gotten a little too Malthusian on this one. Like, I understand the humanity is a plague sentiment, and they traded on it for so long, but I mean, like currently, like the best lyrics about environmentalism and so on, I think the most helpful stuff is the stuff that I guess tries to hold power to account, right? And like direct that anger at the parties most responsible, rather than the blanket, like, we all need to die, as that track says. I think, ironically, Bring Back the Plague had a bit of that, with that delete those who threaten New World, they'll find a way to rid the world of finding new tomorrows thing. Like, shocking for a track called something as blunt as Bring Back the Plague, but there could be nuance for them to be really exploring here to avoid those pitfalls, instead of just regurgitating the same kind of, again, humanity is the virus thing over and over. But at the same time, extreme metal is often about just kind of like indulging in the worst sides of things, and there can be something cathartic about indulging in just a kind of blanket, bleak, oh fuck it all kind of misanthropy, where you're not meant to treat Cattle Decapitation lyrics like social policy, right? It's just the most fuck it, we are awful, which we often are. And there is still in that hook the core idea that does speak to me of kind of being born into, like the worst time to be a person, planning a future, thinking about, what your home is going to be like when you reach retirement age, having, no control or say in it because the damage has already been done by the people before you. And I think that's what makes it feel so mournful and tragic. And, I suppose, well, the idea that maybe we haven't learned the lessons from COVID, we're at this new dawn, but there is something fucking dark afoot. Like, we've gone through this extreme species-wide disaster event, and yet things aren't actually changing. And they are exceptional at translating that grandeur into the music, which again instrumentally as well, like Dead End Residence has that kind of Seasons in the Abyss vibe in the intro, which is cool, and then it has that like fucking kaiju monster scale behind it, where like these horns and stuff start coming in, and it's just like teetering on the edge of like a massive crater opening up beneath you.
Yeah, I mean, on the lyrics front, like I totally get what you're saying, and I appreciate that, you know, it is a bit like, yes, we get it, we suck, we know, yes, it's awful. But I think that would be true if they did do the thing of holding power to account. It's like, things are bad, and it's all their fault. Things are bad, and it's all their fault. I think...
Or at least that would be true, you know? But
and, it's one of those things that when you meet someone in person who talks like this, who's like, we all need to die, you're just like, oh, gee, I'm not going to be friends with you, this is bleak.
Yeah, it makes it feel like nasty extreme metal.
Yeah, exactly.
But that's, I think it's all just part of making this record as extreme as possible. It is exaggerating it because, again, this is a record that has a like mutated Bugman crawling out of like a crumbling human shell as its cover. It is going to be a little bit like exaggerated and overblown in a way because it's just horror imagery. Like, they're going to dial it up for that.
Yeah, and then the way they build those melodies, like you mentioned, the one in Insignificance, it hits that point where there's that kind of that melody that's first sung in this like somber kind of register, but then they're able to like harmonize it with those like strangled cleans, fucking weird. And that is just so Cattle and so everyone else. Like, who else would think to do that? Nobody else can have that as like a trope of their sound, not even like a special one-off moment. Like, these are the things that you take for granted and expect if you've heard a few Cattle albums. And then again, like the like offsetting it with the big gang vocals like the Slaughter Us, that kind of thing. It's just like excellent progression of ideas and songwriting, where there's the like the focus on that thing that nobody else does with that singing. But there are those like shout along mid-range parts as well. They're almost like the angriest part of the sound. I don't remember I think it might be in that same song, but there's like the what the fuck did we do? And it's like, Jesus Christ, man. Like, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, his voice, like it's been said 1,000 times, but he might be the best death metal vocalist, I mean, ever. I'm not sure. Like, so diverse, so capable, but it never feels like he's showing off or like he's just trying to be wacky and weird. Like, even his growl, that's the thing. It's like people always talk about his high register, but even before that, his growl was so singular and so him.
Yeah.
Because you could tell what he was saying, but it was as brutal as any slam vocalist. Like, that seems like an oxymoron. It doesn't even seem possible. And I think one thing that I really like about this record is I think they've gotten better at balancing the two voices. I think Death Atlas was slightly dominated by that high register thing he was doing. Not that I don't like that thing, but it sounded like the trick kind of slightly lost its flavour towards the end of the record for me. But this time around, I think the balance is like perfectly pitched. You get enough of the traditional Travis, enough of what he's doing recently, and then even, as you say, some stuff that he hasn't really done before, that he's kind of pushing into new territory.
I mean, he's absolutely my favourite death metal vocalist, just because, again, there's so much clarity to what he does. You know, again, it's not, you know, his lyrics aren't buried under unintelligible grunts. You can hear every word, even when he's doing the sort of high, shrill shrieks or the sort of guttural things. Every now and then he'll slam into a really go go really hard on that thing just to, you know, get a bit comical with it. But in terms of like Trevor Stern's the only one I can think of who would have as much personality and you would hang on his every word because you buying into the stories he's telling us here. And I guess Travis has all those other extra touches that he brings in here and there. Like I say, the sort of the mangled clean vocals. It's still a thing that like still just sounds like no one does that every time it comes in. It's still one of those tricks that gets me because it's so distinct to him.
I've got a tiny little quibble with the mixing maybe on this one, where I think Travis is so layered now with those parts. It's not quite as like I didn't necessarily understand the words of those choruses as immediately as I have on the last couple, and I think it makes it slightly less instantly memorable. Like, there's the melody at the end of Aphotic Doom, which is brilliant, but I wasn't quite sure what he was saying until I read the lyrics, and I think it just bring that out a little bit more. But like, there is the chemistry of these players together, which is just unreal. Like, when they put like where they put the double bass parts in, like We Are Young, where they know where to put like a sloppy as fuck slam part, like you were saying, how to do something like a Photic Doom, which is like an absolute double bass like bulldozer, but literally no other band would colour it the way they do when it shifts like section to section, with Travis jumping to a higher register and the guitar chords ring out in this kind of more textured way. It suddenly has all this like light and shade to it, and then they will just suddenly stop everything. Here's a fucking mosh riff right in the middle that's going to like whack your head off. There's the like dun 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 kind of breakdown like Raining Blood part in Dead End Residence. That's really great. There's the three main guys who have been in this band for years now, which is obviously Travis, but there's also Josh, who is the nuttiest guitarist, and then Dave, who is the nuttiest drummer. You cannot imagine anyone else locking in together the way they do. Like, again, the fact that these are the riffs that you can almost see to come out on like autopilot or whatever is fucking... It's balmy how effortless they make this feel. Like riffs that are so technical but so listenable and so enjoyable. I was almost expecting them to go in the kind of like black metal direction a bit after Death Atlas, which they haven't done really. I think what you were saying about the kind of the higher end kind of sound of Death Atlas, there's a bit more maybe of that kind of just sort of groove stuff on this record.
Yeah, and that wasn't necessarily a thing I didn't like about Death Atlas, but I do think the balance is stronger this time around. Like, because I like Cattle Decap when they groove. Like, they're fucking amazing at it. Like, again, was it Scourge of the Offspring?
Yeah.
My mind's gone blank. Yeah, Scourge of the Offspring. We've talked about the mournful, sad bit in that, but the breakdown, or the beat, the Hate 5-6 level beatdown of that song is incredible, and I like that side of their sound. So I'm really thrilled they're bringing more of that out. I agree that the black metal thing, it would have been maybe more interesting if they brought that to the fore.
I'm not necessarily in that direction I wanted to go, and that's expected. I expected them to go in because that's the trajectory that seemed to offer, and I was a bit surprised that it didn't.
Well, maybe
I'm happy they've gone in the sort of the heavy groove territory. That's one thing I've really gelled with on this record, is just how many big slamming riffs and grooves there are.
I mean, yeah, maybe this album might be more sort of essential as a Cattle Decap record if it had done something maybe more wildly different like that. But I think as a Cattle Decap record, it's more successful in and of itself for having that balance.
See, you like this a lot more than Death Atlas. I remember when we spoke about Cattle Decap before, you weren't as enamoured with Death Atlas as I was. Which again, my favourite Cattle records are the two before that, but Death Atlas again is like almost like a completion of an arc of that. I have to say that I do not like this record as much as the previous bunch, and I think it's Monolith through Death Atlas being that kind of completed arc has coloured this album a bit, where again I consider this band to be one of my most like beloved bands, where like I'm comparing this to literally some of my favourite records ever made. I don't think it's that, and I think it comes down to, in the past, particularly the earlier ones of those, like Monolith and Humanity and then Anthropocene, how rabidly they tore through those ideas and developments on this record. They invented a sound that pretty much no one else had. Like, one of the most insane, unique sounds to ever exist in metal. Like, it is truly balmy what this band sound like. Like, you could never accuse them of having any lack of identity. If anything, the criticisms of them come from, like, that identity being in, like, excess. But, again, that was something I ought to watch play out in real time. And here, they still have this mental fucking sound that they are the masters of. And this record's great at it. But I think it's definitely not as unpredictable as it once was, and I think the formula of this thing they've worked out, to me, is a lot more noticeable on this record. And again, I know that some people had criticisms of like Death Atlas for that reason, particularly in relation to the clean vocals. I didn't have the problem there because I think the actual structures themselves were still so live wire. This one feels a lot more like a song starts here with a kind of low groove riff, does this type of riff, eventually it reaches such and such a point and, will blow up into something a little bit larger. And even though, like, in sound, this record basically sounds like the Anthropocene Extinction and Death Atlas do, subtly in my brain there is a big difference being formed about, I guess, what kind of experience it is. I mean, I never necessarily subscribed to this about these records, but it reminds me of how Bees and Steve used to talk about One of Us is the Killer by Dillinger or All We Love We Leave Behind by Converge, where like absolutely nothing sounds like it, but they are the least revelatory records in their canon. Like, I just remember something like Anthropocene absolutely fucking throwing me around in all these different directions where I never knew what tempo someone was going to boot off or whatever, whether where there was going to be like an industrial break or that kind of thing. This, I didn't have that.
Yeah, I think that's fair, because I do agree this is probably the least surprising Cattle Decap album. But for me, I never found that too bothersome, because I'm just like, the songs are just really fucking good. And so I guess if you're desperate for, Cattle Decapitation to keep finding ways to, keep you on your toes, then this can maybe feel a little bit less exciting. For me, I'm fine with, Cattle Decapitation just doing more of what they've been incredible.
I really, really, really enjoy this record. Right, again, this is one of my absolute favourite bands. Like, this is one of my it's my favourite death metal release of the year so far for sure. I guess I've got to find the line to divide where, at what point do this band stop making like my favourite fucking records that exist and just start making great records, right? And I'm wondering whether they might be that line.
like I can see why you would hold this band to a higher standard than me. Where I'm like, if they're going to just hit the point where they're just doing good Cattle Decapitation, like,
this isn't a 10 out of 10. It's basically like...
yeah, no, I agree with that, but I always kind of had that in my mind. It was like, bands who do something revolutionary, eventually they have to stop doing that revolutionary thing and just kind of settle into it. And if this is the period where Cattle Decapitation start to settle into it, well, it's still like incredible.
Yeah, for me, it doesn't bother me at all that this is, in quotes, more of the same, because Cattle Decapitation are one of the hardest bands to pick a favourite album of, because they nailed 2 completely different sounds, arguably 3 if you want to go gore grind on the first 2 releases. So
had a few
to be on
sounds over the years.
Yeah, well, that's it. But so to say you've had
there'd be a mental band to do a special on if there was ever the time for that. Like, I'd love to do it.
But let's say broadly 2 sounds that they've nailed,
Sure.
and the latter one being the one that's really made them popular. It's not like someone else has picked up the mantle. I'm sure those records have been influential, but there's no one ripping off Cattle because it's impossible. So if every 3 or 4 years you get a record in this style where every song is fantastic, I'm not all that bothered that it's maybe not that much a leap.
Yeah, I think
last few.
particularly I think it's the structures where, like, I think it's about the point in the record of the storm upstairs you really start to notice it, where like it's track 5 and at that point you've had Terrasite Adaptation and the Insignificance before it that kind of do the same thing of, like, again, what kind of riff it starts off with. About 2.5 minutes in, it would deploy like the melodic break, whatever. I think on my first couple of listens, most of the songs past the 2 singles that I had heard, I was struggling to remember which one was which, because they all start with that same groovy riff, have a part about 2 minutes in when it opens up to a melody, etc. And that's basically the structure that Manufactured Extinct had already perfected back in 2015. And I think it can maybe do with a couple songs that you get on Death Atlas that go for something different. Like they have like maybe a 2-minute song here and there, or have a song that throws out a chorus part really early on and then switches to a different riff and then gets a totally different, like, vaster melodic part or whatever, which I think that record does particularly well. And I think, again, it's having all of these songs in sequence on this. You put on any one of these songs individually and it would just, like, fucking smack you and be like, whoa, what the fuck is this? They are the rare extreme metal band who peaked on albums like 7 and 8, and you might say 9 if Death Atlas is your favourite. Like, most bands land on their sound much earlier than that, and they're always going to be looking at, you know, album 1 to 3 or whatever for like a death metal band. Cattle have this extremely unique story of building and changing. This is album number 10, and it definitely feels like that arc of 7, 8 and 9 is them at their most inspired, I guess, and now they have this sound that they've formed of all those things that they've done that no one else has, and they continue to just write some really good material. You can see the moments coming more, but it does still sound incredible. And I do think that the last couple of tracks on this are very welcome in that regard, because Solastalgia bursts in with this, like, huge melodic emotive black metal blast, like, straight away instead of sort of waiting to get to it. You're not going to mistake that song when it starts for any of these other ones. And then the chorus maybe feels the most earned to me when it properly is like the culmination of the song. Like, it had been really building this sense of desperation over the song, and then it boils over in brilliant fashion. And then that leads into Just Another Body, which is their new longest song there, and, you know, they're following in Iron Maiden and Metallica's footsteps of continuing to get longer over the years. But again, this song, it doesn't quite hit me, like, you know, reduce me to a puddle the way the title track of Death Atlas does, but the way they get grace out of horror is pretty much peerless at this point.
I mean, I think this song is stunning as a closer, like, beginning with, like, just the saddest kind of strings and pianos.
The orchestration in it.
Like, and all that. It is slow and grandiose. It takes a couple minutes to really get to the vocals. But again, it's a 9-minute track. Doesn't feel that long to me. It is ridiculously heavy when it goes, but it's got nuance and intricacies and delicate touches here and there. The middle part of it is probably the most, like, typical Cattle Decap death metal part of it, but there's the way it just builds and unfurls, and you get the chanted clean vocals as it really sort of takes off, and you just get that gorgeous sort of sweeping instrumental to close it. I think it's an amazing song.
I like that on the last couple of records. Again, it's the kind of sort of a thing that they introduced on Death Atlas, and they've taken it further here. Is he started crooning, like, as well as doing, you know, the kind of all that shit. Like, he's just started doing crooning, and that, you know, I'm just a body, that little subtle hook. Again, it's been in my head again. It's so heavy in mood. And then it paces it so well, that kind of funeral march towards the end of the album, and that synth line that just kind of flutters down over it. But, like, they exist in such a specific lane where you're never going to mistake a Cattle Decapitation record for anyone else's. But you don't get that without being so eclectic in your influences, where, like, they are, like, you know, a technical kind of brutal / you know, kind of brutal death grind band. But there is a bit of goth in there. Like, the Cattle Decap that's covered Dead Can Dance, it's here. And even if, I guess, the stream of new ideas and unpredictability has slowed down, that is still special.
I think these last two songs are a big part of maybe why I didn't get the sort of predictability factor with this record, because when I put it on, for most of it, yeah, you're in sort of Cattle Decapitation land, which is a frightening place. But you're sort of in that world, in the tornado. And in these last two songs, for me, they had such... I mean, the scale is already pretty substantial on this record, but they just heighten it even more, and particularly Just Another Body. By the end of that, I'm not necessarily emotionally devastated in the way that Death Atlas has that effect on you and yada yada, but I'm just in awe of the band, and by extension this record. Like, the fact that it takes you to... a death metal band is able to take you to that place at all is amazing, let alone one that's so clinical and technical and brutal. And like you say, 10 albums in, it's... I wouldn't even say that you could say Napalm Death are... I mean, maybe more boundary pushing, yes, but I don't think they were reaching necessarily their best records or their most significant records at that point.
I don't know about that, because I'm such a huge fan of, like, you know, Apex Predator, Easy Meat, kind of utilitarian kind of stuff. But I mean, it's a very good record indeed. Like, even if this isn't going to be kind of in contention for my album of the year spot, like a Cattle Decap record normally would be, it's probably still going to be in my list, right? So, Terrasite by Cattle Decapitation.